All right, 6:28 is your time. We were giving you a live look in St. Petersburg here this morning. Not a live look. This is actually some of the damage that was caused. Milton causing a path of destruction across parts of St. Petersburg and Tampa. In fact, it caused a crane at a construction site to collapse. And here is a look at some of the damage. Good news is we're not hearing any reports of any damage related to this crane collapse. But again, as the sun begins to come up this morning, the true extent of the damage across the west coast of Florida, where this storm roared ashore about 8:30 last night in Siesta Key near Sarasota, is really going to be more evident once it comes up.
Yeah, NBC6's Julia Bagg heading to that location. Also another big story for us this morning. Have you seen this video? Heavy winds causing the roof of Tropicana Field to rip off. The facility was set to host about 10,000 people with cots on the field.
That's some early video,
yeah,
when just a small section.
Yeah.
We saw some updated video on the Today Show where it looked like 90% of that roof was gone.
Completely just shredded there.
All right. We appreciate you spending your time with us here on NBC6 as we work our way through this Thursday morning. I'm Chris Anderson.
Yeah, NBC6 is on your side with all the different areas from the storm and the remains as well. We have team coverage for you this morning with our meteorologists and reporters covering the damage that was left behind. We
want to get straight out to NBC6's Julia Bagg with a look at some of the damage. Julia, I know you started out in Tampa. You've been trying to make your way over to that crane collapse, but you've run into some roadblocks like everyone else.
Yeah, so take a look at this. Just happening in the last few minutes, you saw those utility crews and ambulances lined up here. They just made some U-turns because they were stuck at this intersection because of the high water. And so they're trying to make their way to Clearwater where they are needed, but they couldn't get there from here. So they sat here for quite a while trying to figure out another route, and they just made a bunch of U-turns and headed in another direction to try to get where they need to go. And Chris, Constance, it's high water here, and I'm going to be very careful because, you know, it's dark. It's hard to know where you're stepping, what you're getting into, but you see the lights behind me. That's the Hillsborough County Sheriff's deputies who are not letting anyone get past. They're not even the utility crews trying to make their way to places like St. Petersburg and Clearwater and where we know that damage has happened. And let me show you just across the street here, because you can see water just kind of looks like a current flowing right here. And let's talk about that. Tropicana Field, we've been telling you about part of the roof ripped right off of that, and that just gives you a sense of the power of Hurricane Milton tearing just a piece of roof right off of that stadium. And, of course, that's not the only damage we're talking about. We know about a crane collapse as well, just kind of in the same area as that. If you're not familiar with Tampa and Tampa Bay, you know, think of like kind of a peninsula, right? And it's a ring around the whole Tampa Bay. And so there are bridges that go across the bay, but those bridges are out right now. And let me go ahead and bring you back here live because you can see what's having to happen. Deputies directing traffic and telling people to turn around. They're making U-turns at this spot. Further down the roadway, you can see perhaps some stoplights that are out. And again, we've been telling you more than 3 million people and households really out of power this morning across the state. And that is just a tremendous amount of people in the dark this morning. Want to take a look at what's happening here. You can see this tow truck with a flatbed here with Hillsborough County. See what they're trying to do to make it to some areas that need them, and going across there as deputies have not been letting anybody come this way, but it looks like perhaps they are prepared for high water. So the direction you're looking at, though, where that vehicle is headed, that is where water simply gets too high for the utility trucks to pass through. And so at this point, they have really been working to find another route to get to the people who need them. And so also just spoke with a man who was walking in this area and told me he told me that he was trying to check on his house because he was in an evacuation zone and he had spent the night somewhere else trying to get back over here, but simply could not because the water's too high. And right now there's just so much anxiety, Chris and Constance, for people who did have to evacuate and wondering, how's my house doing? How is my property? Is there damage? Is it underwater? What's going on? So they are waiting to see what may have happened, and that's a difficult situation this morning. Chris,
Julia,
Constance?
Yeah, I saw on social media at about 11 p.m. at night, you've been working for hours now, you were documenting the winds that were coming through and the rains. Can you give us a sense of how things have changed over the hours? Obviously, the rain has stopped. It's windy. It's wet. There's a lot of flooded roadways. Give us a play-by-play of what you witnessed.
Right, so we saw winds just whipping up and down streets and certainly blowing over fences, blowing over trees, and then in certain areas in the dark this morning, just water that you don't know is even there, right? That is the danger, and that's why the Hillsborough County Sheriff is really asking people to go ahead and stay home. Don't venture out just yet because you don't know what you'll run into. Chris, Constance?
That's some of the best advice there because people are eager to go out and maybe take a look at some of the damage or get back to their properties. But that's where you can find more trouble and get yourself in danger with those dangerous situations there. So, Julia, you stay safe as well as you continue to make your way around and survey some of the damage out there in the Tampa-St. Pete area.
All right.
I can't see.
All right. We want to bring in meteorologist Chelsea Embreeze now with a look at some of the current conditions. Hurricane Milton, luckily, moving off the coast right now.
That's right. I mean, this is a live picture of Hurricane Milton right now. But I do want to bring in the director from the National Hurricane Center, Michael Brennan. Thank you so much for all of the updates and everything that you guys have been doing around the clock. I do want to start with the pure size of how far the wind fields were and how expansive some of the impacts were. What can you talk to on how this is going to shape up compared to not, with Helene just a few weeks away and what we saw with this storm?
Yeah, I mean, Milton's going to go down in Florida history as one of the more impactful storms, especially in terms of its scale. We saw, catastrophic impacts in the Tampa Bay region across much of the West Coast down to Fort Myers in terms of storm surge. We've seen the wind damage across portions of the Tampa-St. Petersburg area. We saw substantial hurricane force wind gusts all through the I-4 corridor. And even still this morning, strong winds and storm surge ongoing along the East Coast. So it's affected much of the state. We had tropical storm warnings. We had a tornado outbreak across much of central and southern Florida yesterday. So we saw just very widespread impacts.
With that said, speaking to the tornado impacts, I mean, it was a record for the amount for the state of Florida. And some of them seemed a little bit larger and a little bit longer tracked than we typically see with a tropical system. Would you like to touch on that a little bit?
Yeah, usually the tornadoes that occur in hurricanes are kind of short-lived. Most of them are on the weaker side, but what we saw play out yesterday was much more higher end than that, both in terms of the sheer coverage of the storms, and they were quite strong, and they were long-lived. We saw, these small rotating, what we call supercells, move all the way from South Florida all the way up into the East Central Florida region, up towards the Melbourne area. They were the same cells producing tornadoes over and over again for several hours. So unfortunately, that environment we saw play out across Central and Southern Florida yesterday was very conducive for those longer track tornadoes.
And I know a lot of people sometimes think at landfall, things are going to get better, but sometimes it's the worst at landfall, and that's when the surge really starts to come in. And so with that said, what are we looking at this point with surge as this storm is now kind of exiting the east side? What are we anticipating?
Yeah, we're still getting some storm surge this morning along the East Coast, 3 to 5 feet of inundation above ground level from Cape Canaveral up north to the Jacksonville area. We still have elevated water levels along portions of the Florida West Coast and the landfall location as well. So it's just worth reminding people that it's a very dangerous environment post-storm. There's flooded roadways, there's damage, there's power lines down. And again, it's still dark outside, so people just want to stay in a safe place until their local officials tell them it's safe to go out. We tend to lose a lot of people after these types of storms to post-storm accidents, medical conditions, and cleanup injuries.
And I mean, we have had 10 major landfalls since 2017 in the Gulf, and we are, I mean, seeing these stronger storms. I know yesterday morning when we woke up, it was still a Category 5 storm. Talk us through what we were watching as it moved into that shear and how it finally started to weaken. Tell us a little bit about what you guys were looking at yesterday as it approached the western side of Florida.
Yeah, we did. We saw it play out largely as anticipated. We saw it went through an eye wall cycle, that those very peak winds came down a little bit, and then the storm got big, and that was as anticipated, and that just spread out the impacts over a much larger area. And even now, it has a very different structure than it did yesterday. Even though the center is out here off the East Coast, the strongest winds and biggest impacts are now on the west side of the center, still bringing those hurricane force winds. So it's not always good news when storms weaken. We tend to think, oh, that's good. Maybe it means the impacts are less. But in this case, the storm got bigger as the peak winds came down and just, kind of enhanced the scale over which those impacts were felt.
Well, thank you again, Michael, for joining us. I am going to send things, though, back over to the anchors as we are still watching, again, like you said, the last few impacts on this storm as it's slowly but surely going back out to the Atlantic.
Yeah, Chelsea leaving lasting impacts again. And as the sun comes up, we're going to see more of the damage left behind. But here's some powerful images out of Fort Myers from overnight, where the heavy downpours, the gusty wind, the storm surge, trees whipped around, flooding conditions that they're dealing with. And that's also where we find our own Christian Colon. He spent the night and was surveying the damage up there in Fort Myers. He joins us now with a closer look at the conditions there.
Hurricane Milton really leaving its impact here in Fort Myers. Take a look behind me. Staff here say that a roof collapsed all around the hotel. They would tell me that they just rebuild it in the conference center, but of course that is now part of the whole property, and you can see pieces of it completely shattered all across the area. And I want to bring you guys to another big concern that we were reporting on and people were concerned about was the storm surge. Right now we are seeing that the storm surge increased to about 2 feet here in the Fort Myers area. For sure a big concern for properties owners who were concerned that their properties could be completely destroyed because of the hurricane. So for sure we are keeping an eye out on how high the water gets because of Hurricane Milton. We're for sure staying on top of this story for you and continue to bring you the very latest of the aftermath of Hurricane Milton. For now, we're in Fort Myers. Christian Colon, NBC6 News.
All right, a similar site in Lee County. Deputies up north recording this video of large amounts of flooding in this particular neighborhood. Water they're piling up in the streets and the roadways, reaching all the way up to the front doors of those homes. Yeah,
wild, wicked weather leaving an impact in a little more north as well. You see some downed trees blocking roads in Hillsborough County as it sits on top of a power line. Again, I'm going to take this opportunity. We had some wind here. We had some twisters. If you see any down power lines, stay far away from them. Police say the person, and you see in this, avoided it, luckily. Post-storm recovery efforts will now continue across Hillsborough County and all the counties affected by this storm. Stay with NBC6 as we continue bringing you coverage and tracking Hurricane Milton as it makes its way across the Daytona Beach area, Melbourne, up into Jacksonville, and eventually making its way off the east coast of Florida and out into the Atlantic, where we want to see it go, get far away from land. We're on your side with what you need to know on air, online, and across all of our digital platforms. 6:41 is your time. You're watching NBC6 Today.